one of the first things I notice is there's a tendency when you get a respiratory disease to bring down the temperature in the barn to try to ventilate more. When you compare that to what's going on in the animal that is in respiratory acidosis, bringing down the temperature might not be the best way to do it. So that's some of the work we're working on right now. If we can keep the animal comfortable by keeping its blood pH neutral, and when we say neutral, it's a bit alkalotic, but it's what we call neutrality in blood work. Then when we do that, the incidence of disease is less important. Sometimes it's increasing the temperature and increasing the ventilation at the same time that can be the best.
Welcome to the Swine Canada podcast show, brought to you by Wisenetics. We are dedicated to bringing you the latest insights and discussions in the Canadian pork industry. So I'm Miranda Smith, and I'll be the host for today's episode. And with me today, I have Dr. Daniel Venne, who is a senior poultry veterinarian at Demeter Veterinary Services. So welcome to the show, Daniel.
Thank you.
Yeah, so some of our listeners may be thinking, wait, poultry veterinarian, but isn't this the Swine Canada podcast show? But don't worry, we are going to be talking about pigs today, but we're going to be talking about thermography and how we can use that to better understand environmental welfare and health in pigs. So before we get started on that, Daniel, can you first give us a little bit of an introduction to your background and what you're currently doing?
Well, I'm, as you said, a poultry veterinarian, but with interests in disease, but especially how disease interacts with nutrition and environment. So I've always seen over the years that even though the same virus can infect two animals in two different barns or with two different feeds, the end result might not be the same. So, that's what I like to study, to try to reduce the impact of environment or nutrition on the expression of disease. And usually that makes our producers more profitable.
Right. And you mentioned to me that even though you're mostly a poultry veterinarian, you do also work with pigs, right?
Yeah, we've introduced into the swine practice some of the stuff I was doing in poultry, which is metabolic profiling. So we, like when you go to the hospital, your doctor pulls a blood sample and he can tell you some of the things going on in your body without being actually diseased or what's making you weak. We do a bit the same thing. And with poultry or swine, those are populations of animals. It's interesting to see that if you twitch the parameters or what you give in feed or what you do with the environment, if you twitch it right and make it more forgiving, then the same disease will be a lot less costly. So that's essentially what I try to bring to the swine industry. And there's a lot of similarities between the two species, although pigs don't have wings and chickens don't have teeth. But we still, a lot of the metabolic or chemical pathways are very similar.
Swine Veterinary Partners comprises 4 well-established clinics across Canada: Precision Veterinary Services, Premier SHP, Demeter, Ontario, and Demeter, Quebec.
So today we're going to be talking about thermography. So can you first start by explaining what that really is?
Essentially, it's using an infrared camera that measures infrared light and translates it into a picture. That's the graphy part of it, and thermo is the temperature. So we're making pictures of the actual temperature inside the barn. The advantage of that is getting a lot more data than just having one data point from one probe in a pen. We can actually get 19,000 data points from the same picture, and it it makes you realize that when the probe says it's 70 or 19 degrees Celsius in a barn, it's not all the barn that's at that temperature. Once you understand that and the fact that it's visual, you can try to place the probe in a better place to get more comfort to the animals. And often the probes are pretty high up in the air and the animals are lower down on the ground. And sometimes we realize that maybe the animals are not feeling the temperature we think they are reacting to.
Right. So, like, does the thermography then also show like how warm the pigs are, or is it only showing the air?
It will show you the heat generated by the pig. So that's radiated heat, and it will show you the environmental temperature. Sometimes we'll see some animals, some pigs with a cold nose, like when we are cold and have a cold nose, that'll show up. It's not the best tool to get internal temperature because it will measure the first thing it hits, the first surface it hits. So it's usually skin. But it will give you an idea of at least the environment and how that pig is reacting to the environment. For example, if I guess most producers know that when they look at their animals, if they're comfortable, they'll be in a certain area. If they're uncomfortable, they might go and lay down in an area that's more wet if they're hot, or drier if they're not. So the camera helps us see that very, very, very well. It also sees differences in materials in their ability to react to temperature. For example, wood is a much better insulator than cement. So even though the room can be at the same temperature, if there's a cement wall that's in contact with the exterior, it'll be a lot colder than a wood wall or another type of material.
So how can we then use thermography to check animal health?
Well, in a couple of ways. In heat stress, it's very interesting to see if the environment of the animal is getting them to be too hot. And then I guess the prettiest pictures we get is when sows have their piglets. The comfort temperature for a sow is very different than the comfort temperature for a piglet. And if we don't action on what we see, then the sows can be uncomfortable by being too hot, and that can bring about rapid breathing, loss of CO2, what we call a respiratory alkalosis. That means the blood pH of the pig will go up, and that brings a lot of chemical interactions that are not necessarily always good for the pig. And on the other side, if the piglets are too cold, then they'll breathe slower and they can go into respiratory acidosis. And that's when their pH of the blood goes down, and that's not good either. So having temperature or an environment that's more forgiving keeps the animals in a status of pH equilibrium, and that brings a lot or makes all the other chemical reaction that happen in your body to be as efficacious as possible. The other thing that you might notice is if an animal is cold, it's going to use some of the energy we give it through the feed as just to heat up. And that means it's not making meat with it. That's hard on feed conversion. So that's another way of looking at it. And then sometimes you do want airspeed on some animals to see if the airspeed is cooling them down when there's a heat stress, for example. So those are all applications that you look at. And then the type of heating system you have in your barn is also very important. If you have radiant heating, the heat will be very much directed towards under the heater, so you can have hot spots and cold spots. If you have space heaters, then the heat will often be layered with a lot hotter at eye level and a lot colder at foot level. So using the camera can help you identify what's going on and maybe place your probe in a better area to have a more comfortable temperature at the animal level.
But without the animal eating the probe.
Well, that's the trick. But
Yeah.
we have to be careful. There's ways of making that the animal doesn't eat the probe, that's for sure. But if you put the probe so it's not eaten, but it's giving you wrong temperatures for the animals, you're not making money for sure. So it's an easy fix, but it's costly fix.
Fair enough. Okay, so are you going to or can producers ask Demeter Veterinary Services to come and do a thermography in their barn, or how does that work?
Yeah, we have some equipment in some areas, and now the equipment is getting more and more easy to access to, so it's less expensive than when I started 20 years ago using it. So, but when you use a more expensive camera, then you can generate some nice statistics and show more areas. And if you have a experimented user, then he'll make you understand some of the details that go into the method of the different materials having different reflectances. So the way they translate temperature into infrared, and also find areas where it's more problematic and probably have some solutions. Sometimes it's just changing where the probe is. Sometimes it's just adjusting the control to be 2 degrees higher than what people generally recommend, but that's because where your probe is, it's colder. So it can be as easy as that. The other interesting thing is taking this data and combining it with the blood gas samples, and then you get a better idea of what's going on and if your animal is really comfortable or not. And that changes a lot according to the age of the animals. Young animals don't have the same thermoneutral temperature as older animals. So understanding that makes for a lot more comfort in the animals, and more comfort in the animals is usually they'll pay it back to you in production.
And when you look at diseases, can the thermography kind of help understand or even reduce the severity of diseases in the barn?
Maybe because I'm from the poultry sector, I have a different view on some of the things that have always been done in swine. But one of the first things I notice is there's a tendency when you get a respiratory disease to bring down the temperature in the barn to try to ventilate more. When you compare that to what's going on in the animal that is in respiratory acidosis, bringing down the temperature might not be the best way to do it. So that's some of the work we're working on right now. If we can keep the animal comfortable by keeping its blood pH neutral, and when we say neutral, it's a bit alkalotic, but it's what we call neutrality in blood work. Then when we do that, the incidence of disease is less important. Sometimes it's increasing the temperature and increasing the ventilation at the same time that can be the best, because as we said with the probe earlier, sometimes it's easier to decrease the temperature to try to increase your ventilation, but if it brings the animal in more respiratory stress or acidosis, it's not necessarily positive.
Right. So have you seen examples in commercial barns where people used thermography and it helped them with prevention of diseases, or even once they have a disease that it helps?
Well, we just, one of the interesting things we did lately is at the research farm here at the University Laval, CRISAD, we had a trial going on where we had rectal prolapses in some pens, and they weren't related to the treatments that the nutritional treatments that they were given, but they were the environment or the air path of some pens increased that incidence a lot.
So does thermography pick up cold drafts?
It will if it hits a surface. You can't see the air itself, but you can see the draft hitting a surface. So that's one of the ways. Or what we can also do is bring in a reflector and see what the air does as a reflection on it. So
Oh, okay.
that's one way of seeing it.
So in the case of the prolapses, like that was an area where maybe like some drafts were coming down, or?
Yeah. The air inlets were not calibrated, and they were opened more to one side than to the other. So one side was cold, the other one was warmer. So.
Oh, that's interesting.
But then again, some of this nutrition was also bringing them towards metabolic acidosis. So if you have a pen where you have a metabolic acidosis and you add a respiratory acidosis onto it, then the animal can't compensate and will show signs of disease. If you have one helping the other compensate for each other, then you won't see the signs of the disease.
Right.
So that's why a more holistic or complete approach is important, but there's ways of reducing the incidence or the losses incurred by diseases by looking at some of these factors such as environment and nutrition.
Mm-hmm. And so you mentioned earlier that like the thermography, it has gotten cheaper. So like what are we kind of looking at? Like if someone is interested in putting it in their barns, like what kind of numbers are we talking about?
There are some barns now with artificial intelligence that will put an infrared camera inside the barn, but those systems are still experimental and expensive. But you can get a small infrared camera for your cell phone now for about $400 or $500. So it's a lot more accessible than it used to be.
And you can put it on your phone?
Yeah, it's an add-on to your phone on the USB-C port. Yeah.
Interesting. So you don't need to have actual like cameras hanging on the ceiling. Like you can basically just walk in with your phone and...
Yeah, but then the problem with those is the definition is a bit lower usually. So you might get 600 points of data, whereas a more sophisticated camera will give you 19,000 or 30,000 data points. And then, you adjust to the distance, but you pay for quality, but a lot of it you can see in even with a smaller camera. So I usually have my smaller camera with me all the time, and the bigger one will bring when we have a more particular diagnosis to give.
Okay, so usually you bring it in the case that there is a disease outbreak, and then you put it, or...
Not necessarily, but when we think the disease outbreak can be related to environmental conditions, we'll do it. And we use it a lot when we do research. For research purposes, it's very interesting. And chickens, we once did a trial where we had a lot of pens in a barn, and we quickly found out that the birds that were on the side of the walls were a lot cooler than the ones in the center. So it helps you see it with the infrared camera. And it had a bit of influence on some of the metabolic status of those birds. So yeah, it all works together. And I guess the take-home message is making, as growers or as industry stakeholders, we want to make the animals as comfortable as possible and the most forgiving as possible as we can. And thermography with me has been a very important tool in that. Now, of course, chickens are or baby chicks are essentially cold-blooded when they're born, so their reaction to temperature is a lot greater, but pigs, what we're picking up in maternities is very, very interesting. And you can see the engineers also making new barn constructs, taking a lot more, taking a lot more attention into making an area comfortable for the sow and an area comfortable for the piglets. So I think it's the way to go. The other thing you have to realize is as the average daily gain in our animals increases, that means they work harder and they produce a lot more heat. So the temperatures we were used to when the animals were growing slower can be a lot higher. And then again, a gilt that we're restricting or trying to restrict on weight gain versus a pig that's at this fastest growth rate don't have the same temperature requirements. So yeah, we see a lot.
That makes sense. So which areas of the barn would you say have the most promise in thermography? Or does it not really matter? Is it like every different area has its merits?
Yeah, well, one of the things you'll see is on some of the different production types, if you have a full litter or if you have slats, you might have air drafts coming up from the slats that could be cooling down some areas versus others. The outside walls versus inside walls, especially if they're in cement and there's not a insulating barrier in the middle, will have an incidence. And then if you have side-to-side ventilation, or if you have a ventilation that goes to the top and is more stratified, you'll have different areas of comfort in the barn. And lastly, but the most important to me, is where your heaters are placed plays a big role. So if your heaters are on one side of the barn and all the pens on that side are warmer and the pens on the other side, you think the air of the whole room is at the same temperature, you're going to get surprises if once you put a thermographic picture into the hands of the producer.
Yeah, well, I remember even when I was a student that we did this thing with the smoke, so you can see the movement of the air in the room, and that was very interesting to see, because it makes you realize that some areas it can fall down right onto the pigs, and other areas it's basically still. So in a sense, I guess thermography shows a similar thing. It's just it doesn't show the actual movement, but
it will also show it a lot better for your heat sources, because when you do smoke, you don't necessarily.
That's true.
The best example I could give is when you go to some hotels in New York, you have the person out, the doorman outside, standing in one specific spot, and it's cold outside and he seems comfortable. Well, if you look overhead, he's got an infrared heater heating that spot. The same happens in a lot of barns, depending on your heat source. So if you have a infrared brooder or infrared radiant tube versus a space heater or other types of heating, you'll see some important differences.
Perfect. So is there anything else around thermography that you would like to share with our listeners?
It's very visual. It helps me interact directly with the client. With thermography, you can take a picture, show the client, and he is convinced he can make a change, and we can take another picture once the change is made and see the effect immediately. That interaction or retroaction is usually very positive in the buy-in from the producer or the client.
Oh, absolutely. I think if you can see the difference right away, it makes it so much easier to understand why this was a good change. So, yeah.
It's time for our famous 3.
Perfect. Okay. So to our listeners, if you're enjoying this episode of the Swine Canada podcast show presented by Wisenetics, please remember to like, subscribe, and share it with your colleagues, friends, and family. So then we get to the final 3 questions, which we always ask our guests. So the first one is, what is your favorite swine-related book or resource? And it can be poultry-related in your case, too.
I have one that's related to both. It's called Mineral Levels in Production Animal Health. That, to me, is very interesting, how electrolytes in the water, in the feed, interact with the environment and animal production. So to me, that's a very interesting reference book that I use regularly to try and understand what's going on in the animals, depending on what they're telling us. So, yeah, for leg problems, immunity, and wet litter problems, this book is very useful to me.
Okay, perfect. And then what about a favorite book or resource outside of agriculture?
Outside of agriculture, I really, I like British humor, but one of the books that I enjoyed a lot that's outside is called The Wealthy Barber. And it's a book on economics, but how even though you might not have all the money a very rich person can get, you can get wealthy by doing some simple things regularly and doing them well. So this book called The Wealthy Barber is a read that has shaped some of my ways of thinking about how to create wealth.
Okay, that sounds like a book that everyone should read. Okay, and then the last one is, like, in your opinion, what sets successful swine professionals apart from those that are not?
To me, open-mindedness is very important, having an open mind, and be willing to ask questions. To me, that's a very important one. And once you ask questions, you have to be able to measure the results and use numbers to do your decision making, to generate the best decisions you can make based on numbers. Yeah.
Perfect. So thanks so much for joining me on the Swine in Canada podcast show today.
Thank you.
All right, so that concludes another episode of the Swine in Canada podcast show. So thanks everyone for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast to stay updated on future episodes. So that concludes this episode. I'm looking forward to the next one. Until next time.